Section 18 of A Popular History of France, Volume 5. This LibriVox is in the public domain. A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, Volume 5, by François Guizot, translated by Robert Black. Chapter 37. Regency of Mary de Medici, 1610 to 1617, Part 3. The queen mother made her exit from Blois on the night between the 21st and 22nd of February, 1619, by her closet window, against which a ladder had been placed for the descent to the terrace, whence a second ladder was to enable her to descend right down. On arriving at the terrace, she found herself so fatigued and so agitated that she declared it would be impossible to avail herself of the second ladder. She preferred to have herself let down upon a cloak to the bottom of the terrace, which had a slight slant. Her two equerries escorted her along the faubourg to the end of the bridge. Some officers of her household saw her pass without recognizing her, and laughed at meeting a woman between two men, at night and with a somewhat agitated air. "They take me for a bona roba," said the queen. On arriving at the end of the faubourg of Blois, she did not find her carriage, which was to have been waiting for her there. When she had come up with it, there was a casket missing, which contained her jewels. There was 100,000 crowns worth in it. The casket had fallen out 200 paces from the spot. It was recovered, and the queen mother got into her carriage and took the road to Loches, where the Duke of Epernon had been waiting for her since the day before. He came to meet her with 150 horsemen. Nobody in the household of Mary de Medici had observed her departure. Great was the rumours when her escape became known, and greater still when it was learned in whose hands she had placed herself. It was civil war, said everybody. At the commencement of the 17th century there were still two possible and even probable chances of civil war in France, one between Catholics and Protestants, and the other between what remained of the great feudal or quasi-feudal lords and the kingship. Which of the two wars was about to commence? Nobody knew. On one side there was hesitation; the most contradictory moves were made. Louis XIII., when he heard of his mother's escape, tried first of all to disconnect her from the Duke of Epernon. "I could never have imagined," said he, "that there was any man who, in time of perfect peace, would have had the audacity, I do not say to carry out, but to conceive the resolution of making an attempt upon the mother of his king. In order to release you from the difficulty you are in, madame, I have determined to take up arms to put you in possession of the liberty of which your enemies have deprived you." And he marched troops and cannon to Angoumois. "Many men," says Duke Henry of Rohan, "envied the Duke of Epernon his gallant deed, but few were willing to submit themselves to his haughty temper, and everybody, having reason to believe that it would all end in a peace, was careful not to embark in the affair merely to incur the king's hatred, and leave to others the honors of the enterprise." The king's troops were well received wherever they showed themselves. The towns opened their gates to them. "It needs," said a contemporary, "mighty strong citadels to make the towns of France obey their governors when they see the latter disobedient to the king's will." Several great lords held themselves carefully aloof; others determined to attempt an arrangement between the king and his mother. It was known what influence over her continued to be preserved by the Bishop of Lucon, still in exile at Avignon. He was pressed to return. His confidant, Father Joseph du Tremblay, was of opinion that he should; and Richelieu accordingly set out. The governor of Lyons had him arrested at Vienne, in Dauphiny, and was much surprised to find him armed with a letter from the king, commanding that he should be allowed to pass freely everywhere. Richelieu was prepared to advise a reconciliation between king and queen mother, and the king was as much disposed to exert himself to that end as the queen mother's friends. At Limoges, the Bishop of Lucon was obliged to carefully avoid Count Schomberg, commandant of the royal troops, who was not at all in the secret of the negotiation. When he arrived at Angers, a fresh difficulty supervened. The most daring of the queen mother's domestic advisers, Ruccellai, had conceived a hatred of the bishop, and tried to exclude him from the privy council. Richelieu let be, "certain," as he said, "that they would soon fall back upon him." He was one of the patient as well as ambitious, who can calculate upon success even afar off, and wait for it. The Duke of Epernon supported him. Ruccellai, defeated, left the queen mother, taking with him some of her most warmly attached servants. When the subordinates were gone, recourse was had accordingly to Richelieu. On the 10th of August, 1619, he concluded at Angouleme between the king and his mother a treaty, whereby the king promised to consign to oblivion all that had passed since Blois. The queen mother consented to exchange her government of Touraine against that of Anjou. and the Duke of Epernon received from the town of Boulogne 50,000 crowns in recompense for what he had done, and he wrote to the king to protest his fidelity. The queen mother still hesitated to see her son, but, at his entreaty, she at last sent off the Bishop of Luçon from Angouleme to make preparations for the interview, and 5 days afterwards she set out herself, accompanied by the Duke of Epernon, who halted at the limits of his own government, not caring to come to any closer quarters with so recently reconciled a court. The king received his mother, according to some, in the little town of Coussières, and according to others, at Tours or Amboise. They embraced with tears. "God bless me, my boy, how you are grown!" said the queen. "In order to be of more service to you, mother," answered the king. The cheers of the people hailed their reconciliation, not without certain signs of disquietude on the part of the favorite, Albert de Luynes, who was an eye witness. After the interview, the king set out for Paris again, and Mary de' Medici returned to her government of Anjou to take possession of it, promising, she said, to rejoin her son subsequently at Paris. Du Plessis Mornay wrote to one of his friends at court, "If you do not get the queen along with you, you have done nothing at all. Distrust will increase with absence, the malcontents will multiply, and the honest servants of the king will have no little difficulty in managing to live between them." How to live between mother and son without being committed to one or the other was indeed the question. A difficult task. For 3 months the courtiers were equal to it. From May to July, 1619, the court and the government were split in two: the king at Paris or at Tours, the queen mother at Angers or at Blois. Two eminent men, Richelieu amongst the Catholics and Du Plessis Mornay amongst the Protestants, advised them strongly and incessantly to unite again, to live and to govern together. "Apply yourself to winning the king's good graces," said Richelieu to the queen mother; "support on every occasion the interests of the public without speaking of your own; take the side of equity against that of favor, without attacking the favorites and without appearing to envy their influence." Mornay used the same language to the Protestants. "Do not wear out the king's patience," he said to them; "there is no patience without limits." Louis XIII. Listened to them without allowing himself to be persuaded by them. The warlike spirit was striving within the young man; he was brave, and loved war as war rather than for political reasons. The grand provost of Normandy was advising him one day not to venture in person into his province, saying, "You will find there nothing but revolt and disagreeables." "Though the roads were all paved with arms," answered the king, "I would march over the bellies of my foes, for they have no cause to declare against me who have offended nobody. You shall have the pleasure of seeing it. You served the late king, my father, too well not to rejoice at it." The queen mother, on her side, was delighted to see herself surrounded at Angers by a brilliant court; and the Dukes of Longueville, of La Tremoille, of Retz, of Rohan, of Mayenne, of Epernon, and of Nemours promised her numerous troops and effectual support. She might, nevertheless, have found many reasons to doubt and wait for proofs. The king moved upon Normandy, and his quartermasters came to assign quarters at Rouen. "Where have you left the king?" asked the Duke of Longueville. "At Pontoise, my lord, but he is by this time far advanced, and is to sleep to night at Magny." "Where do you mean to quarter him here?" asked the duke. "In the house where you are, my lord." "It is right that I yield him place," said the duke, and the very same evening took the road back to the district of Caux. It was under this aspect of public feeling that an embassy from the king and a pacific mission from Rome came, without any success, to Rangers, and that on the 4th of July, 1619, a fresh civil war between the king and the partisans of the queen mother was declared. It was short and not very bloody, though pretty vigorously contested. The two armies met at Pont de Ce; they had not either of them any orders or any desire to fight; and pacific negotiations were opened at La Fleche. The queen mother declared that she had made up her mind to live henceforth at her son's court, and that all she desired was to leave honorably the party with which she was engaged. That was precisely the difficulty. The king also declared himself resolved to receive his mother affectionately; but he required her to abandon the lords of her party, and that was what she could not make up her mind to do. In the unpremeditated conflict that took place at Pont de Ce, the troops of the queen mother were beaten. "They had 200 men killed or drowned," says Bassompierre, "and about as many taken prisoners." This reverse silenced the queen's scruples; there was clearly no imperative cause for war between her and the king, and the queen's partisans could not be blind to the fact that, if the struggle were prolonged, they would be beaten. The kingship had the upper hand in the country, and a consent was given to the desired arrangements. "Assure the king that I will go and see him to morrow at Brissac," said the queen mother. "I am perfectly satisfied with him, and all I think of is to please him, and pray God for him personally, and for the prosperity of his kingdom." The treaty was concluded at Angers on the 10th of August, 1620. The queen mother returned to Paris; and the civil war at court was evidently not put an end to, never to recur, but stricken with feebleness and postponed. Two men of mark, Albert de Luynes and Richelieu, came out of this crisis well content. The favorite felicitated himself on the king's victory over the queen mother, for he might consider the triumph as his own. He had advised and supported the king's steady resistance to his mother's enterprises. Besides, he had gained by it the rank and power of constable. It was at this period that he obtained them, thanks to the retirement of Lady Guerre, who gave them up to assume the title of marshal general of the king's camps and armies. The royal favor did not stop there for Luynes. The keeper of the seals, Du Vair, died in 1621, and the king handed over the seals to the new constable, who thus united the military authority with that of justice, without being either a great warrior or a great lawyer. All he had to do was to wait for an opportunity of displaying his double power. The defaults of the French Protestants soon supplied one. In July, 1567, Henry IV.'s mother, Jeanne d'Albret, on becoming Queen of Navarre, had, at the demand of the estates of Bearn, proclaimed Calvinism as the sole religion of her petty kingdom. All Catholic worship was expressly forbidden there. Religious liberty, which Protestants everywhere invoked, was proscribed in Bearn. Moreover, ecclesiastical property was confiscated there. The Catholics complained loudly. The kings of France were supporters of their plaint. It had been for a long time past repudiated or eluded; but on the 13th of August, 1620, Louis XIII. Issued two edicts for the purpose of restoring in Bearn free Catholic worship, and making restitution of their property to the ecclesiastical establishments. The Council of Pau, which had at first repudiated them, hastened to enregister these edicts, in the hope of retarding at least their execution. But the king said, "In 2 days I shall be at Pau; you want me there to assist your weakness." He was asked how he would be received at Pau. "As sovereign of Warn," said he. "I will dismount first of all at the church, if there be one; but if not, I want no canopy or ceremonial entry. It would not become me to receive honors in a place where I have never been, before giving thanks to God, from whom I hold all my dominions and all my power." Religious liberty was thus re established at Pau. "It is the king's intention," said the Duke of Montmorency to the Protestants of Villeneuve de Berg, who asked that they might enjoy the liberty promised them by the edicts, "that all his subjects, Catholic or Protestant, be equally free in the exercise of their religion. You shall not be hindered in yours, and I will take good care that you do not hinder the Catholics in theirs." The Duke of Montmorency did not foresee that the son and successor of the king in whose name he was so energetically proclaiming religious liberty, Louis XIV., would abolish the Edict of Nantes, whereby his grandfather, Henry IV., had founded it. Justice and iniquity are often all but contemporary. It has just been said that not only Luynes, but Richelieu too, had come well content out of the crisis brought about by the struggle between Louis XIII. And the queen mother. Richelieu's satisfaction was neither so keen nor so speedy as the favorite's. Pope Paul V. had announced for the 11th of January, 1621, a promotion of 10 cardinals. At the news of this, the queen mother sent an express courier to Rome, with an urgent demand that the Bishop of Lucon should be included in the promotion. The Marquis of Coeuvres, ambassador of France at Rome, insisted rather strongly in the name of the queen mother and of the Duke of Luynes, from whom he showed the pope some very pressing letters. The pope, in surprise, gave him a letter to read in the handwriting of King Louis XIII., saying that he did not at all wish the Bishop of Lucon to become cardinal, and begging that no notice might be taken of any recommendations which should be forwarded on the subject. The ambassador, greatly surprised in his turn, ceased to insist. It was evidently the doing of the Duke of Luynes, who, jealous of the Bishop of Lucon, and dreading his influence, had demanded and obtained from the king this secret measure. It was effectual, and at the beginning of the year 1621 Richelieu had but a vague hope of the hat. He had no idea, when he heard of this check, that at the end of a few months Luynes would undergo one graver still, would die almost instantaneously after having practised a policy analogous to that which Richelieu was himself projecting, and would leave the road open for him to obtain the cardinal's hat, and once more enter into the counsels of the king, who, however, said to the queen mother, "I know him better than you, madame; he is a man of unbounded ambition." The two victories won in 1620 by the Duke of Luynes, one over the Protestants by the re establishment in Warn of free worship for the Catholics, and the other over his secret rival Richelieu by preventing him from becoming cardinal, had inspired him with great confidence in his good fortune. He resolved to push it with more boldness than he had yet shown. He purposed to subdue the Protestants as a political party whilst respecting their religious creed, and to reduce them to a condition of subjection in the state whilst leaving them free, as Christians, in the church. A fundamentally contradictory problem, for the different liberties are closely connected one with another, and have need to be security one for another; but at the commencement of the 17th century people were not so particular in point of consequence, and it was thought possible to give religious liberty its guarantees whilst refusing them to general political liberty. That is what the Duke of Luynes attempted to do. To all the towns to which Henry IV. Had bound himself by the Edict of Nantes he made a promise of preserving to them their religious liberties, and he called upon them at the same time to remain submissive and faithful subjects of the sovereign kingship. La Rochelle, Montauban, Saumur, Sancerre, Charité-sur-Loire, and Saint Jean d'Angely were in this category; and it was to Montauban, as one of the most important of those towns, that Louis XIII. First addressed his promise and his appeal, inconsistent one with the other. Some years previously, in May 1610, amidst the grief and anxiety awakened by the assassination of Henry IV. By Ravaillac, the population of Montauban had maintained and testified a pacific and moderate disposition. The synod was in assembly when the news of the king's death arrived there. We read in the report of the town council, under date of May 19, 1610, "The ecclesiastics (Catholic) having come to the council, the consuls gave them every assurance for their persons and property, and took them under the protection and safeguard of the king and the town, without suffering or permitting any hurt, wrong, or displeasure to be done them. The ecclesiastics thanked them, and protested their desire to live and die in that town, as good townsmen and servants of the king." On the 22d of May, in a larger council general, the council gives notice to the Parliament of Toulouse that everything shall remain peaceable. Consul Barrot moves that "every one take forthwith the oath of fidelity we owe to his Majesty, and that every one also testify by acclamation his wishes and desires for the prosperity and duration of his reign." Section 18.